Stuart, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris.
So, can you give me and the audience a little bit of background about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Jumio. So I'm responsible for all of their software development for their cloud services, their machine learning, the majority of which goes towards verifying documents from over 200 countries, thousands of documents, approaching 7,000 and above. And it's our job here to verify the document is a legitimate document and detect fraud and prevent fraud, basically on a daily basis, no matter where it's happening in the world.
And is there something that got you interested in being in this field?
Yeah, I think the area of financial services, my involvement is almost 30 years. And whether it's the big banks of Wall Street, where I worked for a few years, or and then globally, or whether it's and these are fraud, different types of fraud solutions, credit card fraud, online, credit debit, ATM, account takeover, and then with Jumio, it's basically identity theft and identity verification. I think just on a daily basis, it's like being a miniature Sherlock Holmes, right? I see attacks. And some of them are nothing more than a sticky on top of a document, and then others are far more sophisticated, like deep fake. So I think just generally, I love to try and figure out how the fraudsters work, and then reverse engineer how they do it and prevent it.
I like the idea that you're trying to figure out what they're doing and not just looking at the results of what they've done.
Well, that's what makes it scientifically interesting and incredibly intellectually stimulating, actually.
So, kind of what is the history of fraudulent documents and how has it changed in the last couple of years? Because I'm sure there, yeah, you think back to the movies from 20 years ago. It was take a photo, print it out, cut it up, slip it under the piece of plastic, and you've got a new passport.
Actually, it goes back a lot further than that. We're talking about banknotes from 100 years. So the science of document security features is, literally decades old. And, initially it was to prevent people manufacturing banknotes. And today, a lot of that technology, and it's incredible technology actually, is used to prevent fraud. So, for example, whether it's a UK passport, a US passport, South African, there's actually 14 different security features on one page of
Wow.
a passport. And it's everything from, tactile text where you can actually feel the text, or whether it's laser perforations, or whether it's a hologram, or whether it's a polycarbonate covering, which is the same material that's used in bulletproof glass. So incredible science in just a passport, including the chip, which is embedded in the passport too. So.
And I'm probably going to jump way ahead. There's probably a fundamental difference between a document like a passport that you're trying to use to enter a country versus a passport that you're submitting for some sort of online verification.
No, they're exactly the same passports. The whole idea of the user journey is to make it as frictionless as possible. So, whether it's a Jumio or like vendor, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have the user take using their mobile phone or their laptop, take a picture of the passport, the main page in a passport, then take a selfie, and then what we do is we match the images.
Mm-hmm.
But we also, it's far more than that, because we try to assess whether the age is the correct age. We try to assess whether the holder image in the document is been tampered with or not. So it's a very simple process for the end user, but behind the scenes, there's a tremendous amount of machine learning and artificial intelligence used to actually do that verification or fraud assessment.
Oh, okay. I got all sorts of interesting questions brewing in my head here in how people do some of these things. So let's talk about the practical applications of the synthetic IDs, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about how they're created and whatnot. So where are people predominantly trying to use synthetic IDs?
Just pretty much in every walk of life, whether it's getting on an aircraft to travel internally or overseas, whether it's trying to rent accommodation or lease accommodation, whether it's you're using it, to get employment. They're all or betting, gambling. They're all examples of opportunities for fraudsters to use synthetic identities. And I recently for the Super Bowl, there was a lot of scam activities, and again, using that process, you can actually verify a user or help identify a fraudster behind the scenes. But anyway, the opportunity for fraudsters is immense,
Yeah.
and it's not limited to one industry. We see it whether it's hospitality, healthcare, banking, etc.
Do you see a lot more on the side of someone is actually trying to commit criminal activity? And I'm trying to separate this from someone who I don't want to use I'm trying to think the proper terms. If you have someone who is in a country illegally, let's say, and they're just trying to open a bank account, and they're not trying to steal money from anybody, they're not trying to commit a crime with that identity other than creating the account. Is there a larger percentage that's being used for purely fraudulent purposes versus someone who's just trying to establish an identity for themselves?
Well, I think there's large volumes of both, right? I mean, you can buy a synthetic identity. Well, until very recently, you could buy a synthetic identity that was extremely high quality, between $400 and $1,000. Today, for $20, you can buy a synthetic identity. So, the barriers to obtaining such documents, high quality documents, is very low today. So, whether it's being used for fraudsters in mass attacks or whether it's just an individual, I would say the opportunity is both. I think the more challenging is the automation that fraudsters use. So they can obtain, 1,000 documents on the dark web, and then what they can do is they can use different techniques like face morph or deep fake, take the image that's on the document, marry that and morph with a selfie, and then attack. And they can attack hundreds of times in a day. So on both sides, whether it's an individual user using it just to get employment or establish residency, or whether it's on the other side, on the mass attacks, we see everything.
And are you seeing a lot more businesses trying to use more sophisticated attempts, even kind of outside of financial services or identity type of services, that they're just trying to use more products like Jumio in order to authenticate their customers?
Yes, because there's multiple reasons for that. Not only to protect the assets, the financial assets of their business or whatever business they're in, but it's also reputational damage. So there's a tremendous amount. We briefly touched on it earlier. Deep fakes. There's a lot more. Studies say that 65% of people are aware of deep fakes and are concerned about deep fakes. But the growth in deep fakes is, well over 700% recently.
Wow.
And so I would say that there's a tremendous amount of awareness, and we're the fraudsters are becoming ever more sophisticated. We've got to become more sophisticated to prevent them. And so that, because of the awareness, because of the press, more and more businesses are using Jumio and Jumio-like services.
I know, like my own kind of scenario with dealing with attempted identity theft, so to speak. There was a vendor that I use, and I won't say who the vendor is or what I use them for because that's not relevant. But I got a message from them saying that someone had accessed my account, and I knew immediately. Well, I hadn't accessed the account, and so I was able to get into the account and clean up what had been done, and ended up calling the company and. They said, "Oh, let's transfer you to the fraud department." Got transferred to the fraud department, and someone had created a fake passport with my name on it and a number of other documents in order to gain access to prove that it was me that had gotten locked out of the account, and they were me, and they were trying to get into the account. And I start to wonder. Are companies with more valuable accounts? This wasn't financial or anything like that. And I had never provided them a photo ID in setting up the account. Most companies don't ask you to do stuff like that. Are we going to start seeing more companies asking for more identity documents in creating accounts so that they can do a better job of preventing fraudsters from getting into our accounts?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, biometrics as a tool to use against fraudsters is growing globally. I mean, there's nearly, I think there was a recent study, there's only one country that's doesn't use biometrics, in the top 100 in the world. So biometrics are used to, get on a train in Tokyo or in Moscow. Joking apart, they were actually, for a while there, the Chinese were experimenting, limiting the number of sheets of toilet paper using biometrics. But generally, biometrics are at least either by themselves or as part of a multi-factor authentication scheme, they're becoming more prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that. So an interesting identity story, I suppose, maybe. My wife and I had been traveling overseas. We came back into the U.S. and we're used to, okay, here's my passport, here's this, here's that, stamp this, where have you been, what are you doing, what were you doing? And we came back in through Los Angeles International Airport, and we're going down the pathway, and they're just like, just look at that screen over there. We look at it, and they're like, okay, go ahead. And I'm like, you didn't even want to see you didn't even want any document from me. I was almost kind of alarmed with the ease that I got through.
Right. That happened to me. I was coming back from Dublin on Saturday and using Global Entry, and I just walked straight through to took the picture, and I just walked through security, and they never looked at my passport. And I mean, it's very convenient, it's frictionless, and as long as the quality of the facial biometric is high enough, I think it's a very good mechanism for doing authentication. I think so. There's a human that's slightly different from when it's a selfie, because there's a human being that can actually do a sort of second verification, right? They're looking at the captured image, they're looking at you, they're making sure the two things match. When you're doing a remote selfie, you've got to be a lot more careful, because the fraudsters can inject the image into the camera or into the laptop. And so they're bypassing the camera. So you're actually, even though you think a selfie, you're not. What you're receiving is a digitally created image. And that's that's the real challenge today. But it's both sides, as you point out. There's the convenience and speed of using the facial matching, but then depending on the communication vehicle, it can also cause all sorts of problems or attack vectors.
Yeah. So with respect to the deep fakes and the usage of them increasing and people being generally aware of it, have we gotten to the point now where I can, using free software, I can create a layer over a different face on me and do a FaceTime with someone and look like someone else? Maybe not someone who's well known, but not me.
Yeah, no, there's a story that was published not 2 weeks ago where a $25 million transaction took place, and it was basically based on a deep fake. The person thought they were looking at work colleagues in a video communication, and they were looking at basically images which had been morphed onto the face, and it was such high quality that that person believed that they were dealing with their colleagues and made a $25 million mistake.
Ooh.
I think the what people don't realize is that you buy 1,000 IDs of different types. And then you take the legitimate holder image that's on the ID, and then they take the face of the fraudster and they do a morph.
Mhm.
So now the fraudster has an image that looks very like the image, a legitimate image on the holder image on a legitimate ID, and that will be matched and therefore verified. And so that's a real challenge for businesses, and it requires some very sophisticated modeling to catch it.
Yeah, that's alarming from both the business side and from the consumer side. Um, with the rate that AI is growing and computational power is growing, this seems like it is a race that is not going in a direction that we can manage.
No, I think you today you need machine learning to detect fraud that's based on machine learning, and so it used to be that you could have an army of well-trained humans could look at the selfie, could look at the document, and could say, yes, fraud has taken place. But that's no longer the case. The quality of the documents being generated by adversarial networks, which is a type of machine learning, and of course the deep fakes, the quality is so high, there's no way that even someone who's trained these days can spot them. Now, there are some things that make deep fakes, at least today, discoverable by a human being. So, for example, you're blinking. It turns out blinking is difficult for a deep fake to reproduce. Turns out the movement of your facial muscles with your voice, also that synchronization is difficult for models, deep fake models to produce.
Mhm.
So synchronization and natural human movements. The voice, it turns out that, at least for you and I, a deep fake created voice, we won't be able to detect it. But a machine learning model will spot the fact it's been created by a deep fake model, because our vocal tracks have all these irregularities, and the model will be able to pick that up. So
Oh,
there are
interesting.
techniques that there are natural movements that models still have difficulty reproducing today. But I mean, their improvement will continue, and we'll have just to continue to find innovative ways to discover them.
So what is the impact of all this on consumers?
Well, it can influence their buying behavior. It can put them in great difficulty financially, because their reputation could be destroyed, their financial well-being could be destroyed, their relationships with their family members could be destroyed. So they're, without being too alarmist, it can have significant impacts on an individual or a community, or with some of the deep fake attacks. I don't know if you're Zelensky. I don't know if you're familiar with the Zelensky video, but if the Ukrainian troops had believed that video was real, it might have caused a different outcome early in the war between Russia and Ukraine. So I think it's a real threat to our society.
And so what can we do? So clearly there's things that businesses can do because they have the resources that they can choose to use to protect their company. But what can consumers do to, how can I, as a consumer, know if I'm seeing a video, whether it's a deep fake or not?
So I think that We all have, well, most of us have good intuition, and I think if somebody's trying to sell you a bill of goods, your spider senses should go up. So I think the first thing is listen to your inner voice and go check a second source before you do anything, such as transfer money. I think there's technologies that you can also apply. Most banks, most uh, financial institutions have the ability for you to use two-factor authentication. And so, you don't have to, but I think where two-factor authentication is available to you, you should do that. And I think just being vigilant, just checking your bank account. Most financial institutions, if someone tries to take something from your account or from your credit card, they have, hotlines, and then they
Yeah.
also have the ability to prevent, just in your case, as you mentioned earlier on, the ability to quickly shut down accounts and shut down difficult situations for you.
Yeah, and I kind of think about my wife and I were talking about this a while back. I had done an episode on virtual kidnapping and how easy voice cloning was, and even having a two-factor authentication between my wife and I. If we're on a phone call and the other one sounds, they're making an unusual request or they're saying something odd.
Right. Yeah, no, again, if something seems untoward, just I would hang up and call them back, because you might not be talking to your
Yeah.
wife. You might be talking to some machine learning system with a fraudster on the other end of it. So I think, there's basic, security hygiene. Let me just put it that
Yeah.
way.
So with respect to the deep fakes, how do you know how much audio or video is needed in order to create something that is maybe not machine learning passable, but to the untrained eye is passable?
Yeah, well, sorry, in what sense? I mean, the tools out there. You can go do a search. You can go the top 10 deepfake software tools, and it will bring up these tools, and it will tell you which ones are free, and you can go to the website, and within, as I said, within 10, 15 minutes, pretty much anybody with you don't have to be a programmer. Anybody with just good common sense can use these tools, because the creator of the tools have made them so easy to use. And of course, they think it's a game, but
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, people are using them for nefarious activities. But truly is very easy. There's things you can do to spot it. So, for example, there's the shape of your head, right?
Hmm.
And there's the shape of my head. And the way these tools work, they will morph a different face on. But it turns out the shape of the outside of your head will be maintained. And so there's techniques that your background. So there's techniques that we can use to, even though it's from a deep fake or face morph perspective, it's very difficult to tell it's a deep fake or face morph. There's other techniques that we can use, such as the background, such as the shape of your head, that if we see repeat fraud, we can correlate the different images.
Oh, that's interesting. Uh, and I imagine that things like, even if you're trying to do real-time deep fakes, that if the scammer has a substantially different face, size of head or proportions, that starts to make the software not work quite as well, I assume.
That's correct. I mean, there's examples on there. If you go look up on the web, there's lots of examples of ratios, body head ratios, that because of the way the software generates the image, that you can actually spot it. Turns out things like very areas of very high detail. So you round your eyes, for example, and in your case, the beard,
Hmm.
also the lapels. There's areas that if you know what to look for, you can spot these aberrations. But I think, coming back to, there's nature in the way these models work. So things like, as I mentioned earlier on, if you can see the earlobes and the lower jaw, you can spot the fact the model's not working properly, right? There's a synchronization issue. Same with, as I mentioned earlier on, lip movement, the facial muscles. There are
Yeah,
ways to spot deep fakes or face morphs.
yeah. I'm thinking back to some of the early Obama deep fakes that sure, yeah, it looks like him, but the color, the shading of the skin color as he's moving doesn't look right. I think almost every deep fake I've seen is the person is looking straight at the camera and never and doesn't turn from side to side and doesn't have kind of those natural head movements when they
Yeah,
talk the way that you and I might.
right. So the earlier versions of deepfake software had these problems. More recently, they're doing a better job of pose, for example. But again, if you fraudsters make mistakes, and one of the ways that we caught a fraudster was they created a deep fake, and then they took the deep fake image and put it into the holder image. And again, if you've got an identical pose, that's almost an impossibility,
Yeah,
right? And then there's the security features on the document. So it's not just a case of taking a deep fake and putting it on the document. They've also got to the overlay. There's something called microprint where they put the microprint over the face. And so some fraudsters forget to mimic the microprint. So fraudsters are very innovative. They're some of them are incredibly creative, but they make mistakes, and that's what we have to rely on.
yeah. Hopefully, they're making mistakes more frequently than they're not making mistakes.
Yep.
Is there anything about this kind of cat and mouse game with the technology that keeps you awake at night?
Yeah, it keeps me awake both on the positive side and on the and on the negative side. On the positive side, there's fraudsters. Yes, they may work in gangs or in groups, but you've got whole nations creating security features or creating defenses that help us prevent bigger and bigger or high velocity attacks. And so I think on one side, I think the good news is there's whether it's the banking community or whether it's consortiums that specialize in fighting fraud. I think there's just a general community of people trying to stop fraud. Because again, we're trying to protect our, whether it's an individual or a business or something larger. On the things that keep me awake is I see fraud attacks, different fraud attacks, creative fraud attacks, pretty much on a daily basis. Now, for the most part, we're able to figure out what's causing that fraud attack and build something to stop it. So I think the thing that keeps me awake at night is where there's a fraud attack vector that is going to take us months and months to solve. That's what keeps me up at night.
Interesting. Excuse me. We'll edit that out. Is there a particular document that is used for fraud more often than other documents?
Yeah, well, obviously, there's a preference for hitting the UK, the United States, but we see fraud all over the world, whether it's Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, whether it's Hong Kong. We see fraud all over the world, but I definitely would say that the US and the UK we see a lot of now. The good news is the security features are a real challenge to. We talk about fraud abuse, right? So, for example, the fraudsters will change PII fields on a document, or they'll change the holder image on a document. And these particular fields or these particular images are protected by multiple security features. So, for example, on a California driver's license, the holder image is protected by a hologram, microprint, and tactile text. So there's 3 security features that are on that document. And then again, on that document, your initials and your year of birth are repeated 7 different times. So fraudsters have to be pretty thorough to manipulate the entire document and the
Hmm.
whole image. That takes a lot of science and knowledge, and I think there's over 116 different security features in terms of the European documents. So there's lots of mechanisms that we can use to spot fraudulent abuse of the documents. So
It makes me start thinking of interesting ways to try to create security features, cryptographic, where you're taking some field or some data and applying some cryptography to it and printing that on the document, because then the person has to know how to reverse
right,
engineer the cryptography.
right. Assuming it can be,
Yeah.
as you well know, there's you know cryptology techniques that are one way. So, even if they could figure out that such a code was there, they would it would be almost impossible in some cases for them to break it. So, but I find it fascinating. And as you open the segment, it's thinking about this is 100 years of security feature evolution from banknotes to the ID documents that we see today.
Do you see much growth in biometrics in terms of retinal and fingerprints and things like that on documents? Do you see it moving that direction?
Yeah, so obviously, if it's just a face or a fingerprint, the term is, it's a single biometric,
Hmm.
a unimodal. And the industry trend is towards multimodal biometrics, and then something called multimodal liveness. So that's when you're using. So a simple example of multimodal biometrics would be to use the voice and the face, or to use the blood vessels in your eye, the sclera, or to use the retina, although that requires special device today. But the combination of biometrics and then coupled with liveness, is this a real human being?
Hmm.
Can you see movements in the eye, movements in the face? Can you see texture movements? Can you see the blood flow, believe it or not, in your face? So they're all techniques that you can put together to make it easier to verify an individual, easier and more reliable to spot that it's a live individual.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
yeah,
this is so fascinating. I can see why you like this field.
yeah, I'm an engineer, scientist, and so this is and the fraudsters are always challenging us to build better systems. So I mean that's what my team and I enjoy.
Is it resulting in, I'm thinking like building better system, is it resulting in new technology for creating the microprint, for the new biometric technology in that sense of like, hey, let's just create a whole new way of providing some sort of authentication.
Yeah, no, so most definitely, I think the at least within Jumio, the thing that we're particularly proud of is we started with a notion that documents have an anatomy. And actually, if you look at the American Association of Motor Vehicles, they have a specification. It's well over 100 pages long, and they talk about the layout of a document. And so the layout is the anatomy of a document.
Hmm.
Where's the holder image? Where's the ghost image? But it turns out that if you think about it, documents have an immune system, and the immune system is the security features.
Hmm.
They are there to protect the document. So documents have an anatomy. Documents have a set of protection mechanisms, and so we're able to both verify the documents, but we're also able to detect literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different attack vectors. So that's one thing that came from the document side. And then on the authentication side, if you think about what constitutes an identity, there's obviously the information, your first name, your last name, your social security number, your address. But actually, you should think about it in a much broader sense. I mean, there's probably more indicators of who Chris Parker is by the use of your cell phone
Yeah.
than your biometrics. And so combining the physical biometrics, which we're talking about now, behavioral biometrics, the way you lift your hand, the way you swipe, the phone usage. If you combine all that information, that's more future-proofing your identity. And then there's real-time tracking of your bank account. So combining all that information really provides a particularly unique way to identify Chris Parker, and that's how we can better protection.
I've heard that someone had written an authentication methodology by everybody types differently. So you could the system would prompt you to type a particular phrase, and it's going to be different every single time it asks you.
Right.
And it just knows by the way that you type who you are, which to me is interesting to think that everybody has a unique way of typing.
Yeah, that's a class of behavioral biometrics, and the same is true of the way you tap the digits on your phone. You swipe the phone, the way you use your right hand, bring the phone up, the way that. So by collecting all that information and fusing that information together, you get a much more accurate behavioral representation of Chris. And so if you combine the behavioral biometrics with the physical biometrics with your device information, then other assets, it just gives you a particularly a much higher what's the word I'm looking for, confidence that you are who you say you are.
It becomes 4 or 5 factor authentication versus 2.
Exactly. You're trying to, and this is, you're an expert in security. This is not a new concept. Most security systems are layered. So the same thing is going to be needed to define and protect your identity.
Do you see, if you were to say, hey, we're going to launch 3-factor authentication, what would be the third factor for you? Not for you personally, but like what would you see that could actually be implemented as a 3-factor authentication?
Well, so firstly, let's start with the user. Anything that you do that just adds friction to the user is going to be a non-starter, particularly for the younger generation. Yeah. They want as fluid, smooth, and as fast an experience as possible. But I think we talked about multimodal biometrics, so you can use the voice, you can use the face. You can use the behavioral biometrics, and then you can use information associated with the phone, whether it be, assuming the user wants to allow you to use this information, you can use things like the location of the phone. You can use, and again, there's something called continuous authentication, where actually it's not just an individual session. You're actually collecting that information as a continuous process. And so I wouldn't think of it as 3-factor authentic. Well, if you want to think of 3 factors, I would use voice, I would use face, and then I would use something associated with behavioral, and then the device itself. And again, I think you're going to get a much more secure experience, authentication experience. Yeah,
the challenge is always going to be the friction, though.
Right. And everything I described can be done so that people are very, very used to now doing a selfie. And whether it's the combination of the I personally prefer voice and face because it's so much more natural for me just to say open sesame or something similar. And then also to use the behavioral biometrics. So there is a lot of what's the word, accuracy associated with using these different biometrics coupled with a device.
And when do you see a time horizon when this is going to shift from our current methodology of 2-factor authentication?
It depends on. So it's happening today. You can, if you. I was watching a video on behavioral biometrics, and there's many companies are selling behavioral biometric solutions today. And then the speed of innovation in the mobile devices I mean, between the accelerometer, the gyroscope, the magnetometer, these three things, the sensitivity and the amount of information you get with a phone is causing change as we speak. So I don't think it's just one instance in time. I just think it's continually changing. And, we have the benefits of being able to use all the information coming from the phone to basically protect ourselves.
So everyone's going to be required to have a smartphone then.
No, you don't have to have a smartphone, but most people do, as you well know.
Yeah, I think that is I don't know that I see a person walking down the street that doesn't have a smartphone with them.
Right. I mean, yeah. If you're in Japan, you walk down, it's like seems like everybody is walking down with the mobile phone to the rear. So
Yeah, it is. Phones are very ubiquitous these days. So, as we wrap up here, is there any parting advice that you have for businesses and for consumers?
yeah, I think working with people who understand the threat vectors, the sophistication of the threat vectors. You've got your own business to run, and so relying on people who are, whether it's Jumio or whether it's another vendor, getting experienced professionals to come in and help you build your security infrastructure and your customer onboarding. That would be one thing. I think the second thing I would suggest is helping develop a culture that understands the security challenges, the security threats, and that's an ongoing educational endeavor. So they would be the two things.
Awesome. And Stuart, if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my email is stuart.wells@gmail.com. And if anybody wants to send me a question or a request, please do so.
Do you publish any white papers about the research that you're doing?
Yeah, so I speak at various conferences, excuse me. The research is generally either discussed at these conferences. We file patents where the technologies that we've invented are available online through a simple Google patent search too. So lots of or approach our marketing or our PR firm where they'll also make materials available.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link to those. Stuart, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Really enjoy talking to you, Chris. Thank you for having me.